All right. So next is when pre-deforming the rigids before it gets simulated. So I've got this um, rigid deformation. It's just to make the pieces that are further back from the impact point sag a little bit on the ground. This is just me faking it so that it would have that kind of look on the ground as we get into the fire tornado. So if you have a look, so now we kind of see that sag on here. Pretty cool. Just keeps that shape read a little bit better. I don't want to completely just make a hole on the ground. I want there to have some kind of crater. A nice fall off for the crater. So awesome. So now the way I did this, I didn't. The reason why we have to pre-deform it, at least while I was doing this, is that I had to pre-deform it so that when the pieces get simulated, all the active pieces, they would be colliding on the already deformed sagged pieces. Because if they weren't sagged yet, then what happens is if you just do the different deformation post-sim, the simulated pieces will not be colliding correctly with the post-deformation. So this is why I did the pre-deformation first and then run the sim and have them interact with all these sagging pieces. Cool. So now the way I did it is just using the same mask creator. Now I'm using the creator 2 because this is the mask that is used for the bigger ground deformation noise. So all I've done is just remap it into some value and call it mask rotate. Have a look. That's my mask rotate. Next, the same mask and saying mask down. Yeah. So those are almost literally the identical masks. Now with the pre-deform, I'm doing two things. First of all, I'm setting the prim intrinsics to get the rotation for the pieces to sag, and just modifying the position on the y-axis to push them down. All right, so forget about this line. So all I'm doing for the position, let's talk about the position for now because it's the most simple one out of all the deformation parts. So the position is literally just this line of code. So I'm just taking the y-axis of a position, subtracting it by some parameter I've set down here, push down, multiplying it by the mask down that we just created using the attribute remap, and multiplying that with the overall deform. So if you see what the overall deform does, it just deforms the whole thing. So this is what I use to animate the sagging on the post deformation animation. You see there's an animation here. Boom, boom. So when you see, it's I think I like to think that it's the same code. Yeah, it is. just with a um, animated scale deform so that it moves while everything gets wrecked. And you can see all those pieces being deformed, and those pieces also get collide with the correct deformed um, pieces. Awesome. So again, with the position, I'm just taking the y-axis. So if you look at this now, where did that wrangle go? To oblivion. So we just have a look. All I'm creating is a float, new pause, which is just the y-axis. The reason why it's a float is because I'm just using y-axis to modify the thing. Just taking the y, and if you plug that into y, nothing happens because it is what it is. Y. Minus, subtracting that with some parameter. So now if you see, take this on, the whole sorry, new boss. What is going on, sir? Alright, so that was just a random bug, viewport bug. And it's still doing that thing. Let's just remove the back pieces for now so that we can see what's going on here. Awesome. So that's all I'm doing for the position deformation. And I'm using that mask down attribute that we just created. And if you see what that does, it's just pushing down an area of the pieces based on what we created here on the attribute remap. Cool, you can see that. Awesome. And next will be that overall deform parameter that we use to scale this whole deformation down. So that's that. Scale deformation. So if you push down to 1, nothing happens because this scale deformation has to evaluate to a number to see something. Cool. All right, now for the slightly more difficult part would be rotating the pieces appropriately. So really it's just a simple overriding of the transform intrinsic that we get for free with the pack fragments. So if you go under geometry spreadsheet, under the primitives, we can drop down this intrinsics thing and we go down to transform. If you have a look, our transform intrinsic are all uniform. So it's 1 0 0 0 0 1 0 0 0 1. All we gotta do is that this is a literally just an identity matrix. An identity matrix is just a nothing matrix. It doesn't affect me. It's just normal. It's just So how I'm doing the rotation is by, so if you have a look at these, all these pieces are only just rotating along. If you remember how we created the angular velocity, So all these pieces are actually just rotating around this axis. You have a look at this guy. See? These pieces are just rotating along those axes. So the way I got that is literally the same way I did for the angular velocity. By just getting the direction, which is at P, normalizing that, setting the up attribute, the up vector, and getting the cross product between those two vectors. And so there's a function called rotate in Houdini, which rotates a matrix by some angle along some axis. So what we did here, so this part of the rotation function, the argument is how much angle do you want to rotate these pieces. And this part of the argument is how much or on which axis do we rotate these pieces around. So if we just have a look at, I'm just going to bypass this for a bit. I'm just going to show you. So we're going to rotate a matrix called M. This M matrix is just an identity matrix. It's that uniform matrix we just talked about, the 1 0 0 0 0 1 0 0 0 0 1. So I'm just going to take that, rotate that along some with some angle. Let's just say let's create a new one, new angle test. And then with the x-axis, I'm just going to create a new axis test. That. So if you have a look, so nothing's happened yet. All these pieces have just pushed down. Let me just duplicate this so I don't destroy whatever we've created. Okay. So I'm just gonna multiply the push down for a bit and show you what the rotation thing does. So now we've created that new angle test and new axis test. If I just create those parameters and say rotate along the y-axis. The moment nothing happens because we haven't given it any value for the angle. So now if we increase the angle, what you see is that all these pieces rotate around the y-axis, their y-axis, but they do it in their own pivot. So this is what we need, and we can just say maybe around the z-axis. If you look again from 0, we go up. Now they're rotating around the z-axis. Cool. So instead of just giving it a uniform axis, we need to use the axis that we got from creating the cross product. So if you have a look, let's get that. I've already have it here. So that new vector is x along x. Now you can see that they're being rotated around that new vector that we just created. Very cool. And the reason why the pieces in the impact point are not being rotated is because this lerp function is literally just like a lerp function, but it's meant for quaternions and also matrices. So all I'm doing here is slurping between the new matrix, which is this rotated matrix, and an identity matrix, which is just, if you put an ident, it's just a uniform matrix that we just does the default transforms. So cool. And that's based on the mask here. If you see the mask active, if it's greater than a threshold, set a parameter for that. So if you see, the more we increase the threshold, the more pieces get rotated. If I reduce the threshold, the more pieces are less rotated. Cool. So that's that. That mask is just an integer. It's a 0 and 1 value. And it's lerping between the rotations and the position, which is the pushing down thing. Awesome. So if you have a look at this whole thing now, we can play around with the scale deform. Play around with the push down. How much further we want to push it down. How much angle do we want to give it? 7, maybe, if you're crazy like that. Cool. Well, I'm just gonna leave it at default. Cool. So that's the predeformation. And this is just me activating the pieces based on some start frame and a duration. So this is the most useful thing about having these 1 0 0 to 1 masks. We can do these kinds of things. If you have a look at what's happening here, I'm just gonna color these pieces based on their active attribute. Red, actually blue here. So if you have a look, this thing expands. The reason why it expands, I have this activate attribute which goes from 0 to 1 based on the start frame and duration. So I'm just fitting the current frame from the start frame and the start frame plus duration, and just using the mask creator to say, hey, is the activate less than or equal to the mask creator, then we would give it a value of 1, which will then activate. Boom. That's pretty cool. And the reason why it expands like this, because our mask looks like an expanding mask, a radial mask. So that's why, that's the cool thing about having all these masks. Awesome. And here, I'm just setting it so that we stop the expansion of the activation around some threshold of the mask active. That way we don't activate all the pieces at all. I mean, all the pieces. Okay.